The world had been unprepared. No one had expected it to happen this way. No one had predicted them. At first, the signs were subtle, almost ignorable. Disturbances in space, erratic shifts in satellite signals, and strange, unexplainable anomalies across multiple nations. Scientists dismissed it as random cosmic activity, a mere blip in the quiet expanse of the universe. But when the first fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, nothing about it could be ignored. The ships were massive, vast, obsidian hulls that blotted out the stars. No one knew how many ships there were. Every attempt to count was disrupted by the aliens' interference in Earth's communication networks. What was clear from the first instant was that their power was absolute. Earth's military assets, every missile, every satellite, every last-ditch defense system, were obliterated within hours of their arrival. The skies above Earth darkened with the shadow of invaders that seemed impervious to everything humanity had. General Ava Carson sat in the war room of what had once been the Pentagon, now the temporary headquarters of the world's remaining military forces. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the data on the large holographic display. A cold silence hung over the room, filled only with the hum of monitors and the occasional shuffle of uniformed officers. Ava had been a strategist, known for her unorthodox tactics, but nothing in her career had prepared her for this. "General, the main fleet has deployed over Central America," one of her officers reported, his voice tight. "They've disabled every major satellite and communications node in the region. There's no sign of resistance." Ava nodded, her mind already whirring through possible strategies. What had worked on the battlefield, what had once felt invincible, was now irrelevant. This wasn't a fight she could win with traditional methods. She stood up from the table, her gaze moving to the other generals in the room. They all looked at her, waiting for direction. "This isn't a war of firepower," Ava said, her voice low but commanding. "This is a war of survival. They're not just here to conquer us. They are here to destroy us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. No one had dared say it outright, but the thought hung over them like a dark cloud. Ava could feel the weight of it, the crushing realization that humanity might not survive this. One of her top aides, Lieutenant James Novick, interrupted the silence with urgency. "General, we've received a broadcast from them. It's inhuman. They claim that humanity has no place in the galaxy. That Earth is now theirs." Ava's eyes narrowed. She'd heard this kind of rhetoric before. Conquerors, destroyers who thought themselves gods. But the Varkor, they didn't just want to dominate, they'd wanted to erase everything human about Earth. The message was clear. You are nothing. You will be erased. Surrender now. Her fists clenched. There was no room for negotiations, no peace to be had. This wasn't about diplomacy. This wasn't about getting the upper hand with a clever tactic. This was the fight of humanity's life. "Ava," Novick said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what do we do? How do we fight something like this?" The question hung in the air. Ava stared at the glowing blue map of the world before her. Her eyes were full of steel now. There was no hesitation. She had led men and women into impossible situations before, but this was different. This wasn't a conventional enemy. This wasn't even an enemy at all. It was an extinction event. "We survive," she said, voice unwavering. "And we show them what happens when they underestimate humanity. We fight with everything we've got. We fight because we are human. And we will never bow down." Her words rang through the war room, and for the first time since the invasion, a spark of determination flared among the officers and soldiers. It was the first spark of resistance, the first glimmer of hope. Ava knew they couldn't win by force. Not yet. But she had one weapon the Varkor hadn't considered, humanity's indomitable spirit. And with that spirit, she would lead them into the heart of the fire. The days following the Varkor's arrival were a blur of shattered communications, failing satellite links, and desperate attempts to rally the scattered remnants of Earth's military. Every attempt to strike back was met with failure. It was as if the invaders could anticipate every move, every tactic. Humanity's organized resistance had crumbled, replaced by a loose coalition of soldiers, scientists, engineers, and civilians who dared to fight back, however they could. In the midst of this chaos, General Iva Carson had a single desperate goal: to ignite the spark of resistance. Ava stood at the helm of a makeshift command center, deep beneath the surface of a military bunker, her mind racing. The humans had been outclassed, outgunned, and overwhelmed from the very start. Yet there had to be a way to strike back. They couldn't fight the Varker with brute strength. They had to fight with what made them human: ingenuity, unpredictability, and an unbreakable will to survive. "This is our chance," Ava said, addressing her small team of officers. "We know where they're vulnerable. The Varkor rely on supply convoys to sustain their operations. If we hit their logistics, we can cripple their entire operation." Lieutenant Novak, who had become her most trusted strategist, nodded. "It's a long shot, General. But if we can destroy one of their supply hubs, even temporarily, it could disrupt their command chain. It could give us the breathing room we need." Ava's eyes narrowed, her voice cold. "No ifs. We're not giving them room to breathe. We're going to hit them hard, fast, and without warning." The plan was risky. The Varker had superior technology, and their advanced surveillance systems had already detected several human attempts to strike back. But Ava wasn't concerned with odds. She was concerned with results. And to her, every loss was a lesson, every setback a piece of intel for the next fight. The small resistance force, barely a dozen soldiers, was equipped with scavenged gear. Nothing special, just what they could steal or repurpose. They had no advanced weapons, no cutting-edge tech. But they had something the Varker didn't: the element of surprise. The mission was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. The Varker had established a supply route that ran through a dense jungle region of South America, an area so dense with foliage that they had grown complacent. No one had expected a small force of humans to strike there. Ava's team would infiltrate the jungle, set explosive charges on the supply depot, and retreat before the Varker could react. The night was their ally. Under the cover of darkness, the resistance team, dressed in camouflaged uniforms, moved through the dense undergrowth. The jungle, once a peaceful haven for wildlife, now felt like a battleground. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig, seemed magnified in the silence. They moved with calculated precision, carefully avoiding the Varker's patrols. The aliens had deployed automated drones to protect their supply lines, but they were slow and clumsy, no match for the human skill at blending into their environment. When they reached the supply depot, Ava's heart raced. The facility was guarded by a series of towering alien drones, and the metallic scent of their machinery filled the air. But Ava had anticipated this. Her team set the charges with deft hands, planting them around the key supply containers. 5 minutes, Novak whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get out of here. Now." Ava nodded. They had one shot at this. The explosives were rigged to go off on a timer, and with every second that passed, the risk grew. The mission was a success, but the real danger was what would happen when the Varker discovered what they had done. Ava's team began their retreat, moving swiftly through the jungle, their hearts pounding. Then, just as they neared the extraction point, the distant rumble of an explosion shook the earth beneath them. The Varker's supply depot was engulfed in flames. Ava's chest tightened as she realized what had just happened. This wasn't just a victory. It was a statement. The Varker would now know they were not invincible. They had just been struck by something they hadn't anticipated: human resilience. The explosion was heard miles away, an earth-shaking roar that sent tremors through the ground beneath Ava's feet. For a moment, the team stood frozen in the jungle, their ears ringing with the aftermath. The depot was gone. The Varker would be scrambling to assess the damage, and in the chaos, Ava's team had one precious advantage: time. "Move," Ava barked, her voice sharp as ever. She didn't need to tell them twice. The team sprinted through the dense undergrowth, hearts racing, their minds focused on one goal: escape. They had to get out before the Varker sent reinforcements. The dense jungle seemed to close in around them as they pushed forward, their breathing heavy and rapid. There was no time to look back, but Ava knew the Varker would come, faster, more ruthless, and more determined than ever. As they reached the extraction point, a small clearing on the edge of the jungle, the distant sound of Varker drones closing in sent a fresh wave of panic through her team. But they made it, just barely. As the chopper blades hummed overhead, lifting them away from danger, Ava allowed herself a brief moment of relief. "We did it," Novik said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "We really did it." But Ava knew better than to celebrate. This was only the beginning. The Varker were no longer dismissing humanity as insignificant. Now they would target the resistance with everything they had. The loss of their supply depot would have enraged them, and Ava's team would be a prime target. They couldn't afford to slow down. Back at their makeshift command center, a sense of urgency settled in. The explosion had been a significant blow to the Varker, but they needed more. They needed intelligence, something deeper, something that could change the course of the war. And that's when a report came in from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Sarah Quinn, a former archaeologist turned strategist for the resistance, burst into the war room, eyes wide with excitement. "General," she said breathlessly, "I think we found something." Ava raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, something?" Quinn unfolded an ancient map, its edges tattered and worn. It's a map to an underground site in what used to be Rome, deep beneath the ruins. According to my research, it's a place no one's ever been able to fully explore, but there are legends, stories of a relic, an artifact with power far beyond anything we've ever seen. If the rumors are true, it could give us a fighting chance. Ava studied the map, her eyes scanning the old lines and markings that seemed almost too deliberate to be coincidence. A relic, an artifact. She didn't have time for legends, but something about the urgency in Quinn's voice made her pause. The Varker didn't land on Earth by accident, Ava said, her tone sharp. They know something we don't. They're here for more than just resources or conquest. If this artifact is real, we need it. We can't let them get their hands on it. Exactly, Quinn said, her excitement palpable. If we can get to it first, we might just have the edge we need. Ava's gaze hardened, the weight of the decision settling in. A dangerous, unknown relic beneath the ruins of Rome. The risks were immense. The Varkor were already calming the planet for any strategic advantage. But Ava knew one thing. Humanity didn't have the luxury of hesitation. "Prepare the team," Ava ordered, her voice low but resolute. "We're going after it. This could be our only shot at turning the tide." As preparations began, Ava stood in front of the map, her mind racing. They had taken the first step by striking the Varker's supply lines. But now, to fight back with any hope of winning, they had to uncover the hidden power beneath Earth's surface. And the cost of failure, too high to contemplate. She took a deep breath, the weight of what was ahead settling on her shoulders. This was humanity's last hope, and she would see it through, no matter the cost. The journey to the ruins beneath Rome was perilous. The Varker's presence on Earth had turned even the most familiar landscapes into hostile zones. What had once been vibrant cities, bustling markets, and quiet countryside were now barren, almost unrecognizable, scared by the alien invaders' unrelenting conquest. Every step closer to the underground city felt like a march into a dark, oppressive future. Ava knew that the Varker would be searching for whatever it was humanity was after. She could feel their eyes on them, even through the chaos of war. But the relic beneath Rome was their best chance. As they descended into the underground complex, the air grew colder, heavier, and a sense of ancient power lingered in the walls. The resistance team, led by Ava, had been cautious. Every step was calculated. The deeper they went, the more dangerous the path became. Even though they had prepared for this mission for days, no one could have anticipated what was waiting for them in the darkness. They reached a large, circular chamber at the heart of the ancient ruins. Strange symbols covered the stone walls, glowing faintly in the dim light of their torches. In the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, shrouded in shadow. Ava felt an eerie pull towards it, as though the relic itself was calling her. She approached cautiously, glancing at the faces of her team. Uncertain, wary, but determined. "Is this it?" Novak asked, his voice hushed, as though speaking too loudly might awaken something ancient and deadly. Ava nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the pedestal. The map Quinn had uncovered had been precise, but the chamber they stood in was far more complex than they had anticipated. Still, there was no time to hesitate. They had come this far. The Varker could be anywhere, and the sooner they retrieved whatever was hidden here, the better. As Ava approached the pedestal, her hand hovered over the artifact. The air around it seemed to shimmer, as if responding to her presence. But just as she reached out, the ground beneath them trembled. "Shit! Move!" Ava barked, her instincts kicking in. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, and the ceiling above them began to crack and groan. Before they could react, the first Varkor soldiers dropped from the shadows, advanced, sleek, their exoskeletons reflecting the dim light. The aliens were quick, their movements fluid and deadly. Ava's heart raced. The mission had turned into a trap. They'd walked straight into a Varkor ambush. The first soldier lunged at Novak, but Ava was faster. She fired her weapon, a shot to the creature's chest. It staggered back, shrieking, but it didn't go down. More soldiers poured into the chamber, cutting off their retreat. "We need to fall back," Quinn shouted, but it was too late. The Varkor were everywhere, and their weapons, high-powered energy rifles, blasted through the walls with devastating precision. The team fired back, their weapons little match for the aliens' technology. Ava moved with military precision, taking cover behind the columns that dotted the room. Her mind raced. This was not just an attack. The Varkor had known they were coming. They had known about the artifact. She had led them straight into a trap. "General, we're losing ground," Novak yelled, his voice strained as he fired his weapon at a group of advancing soldiers. Ava's mind spun. They couldn't fight this battle and win. Not like this. The relic was within reach, but with the Varkor closing in, they were running out of time. "Retreat," Ava shouted, the order ringing out as loud as the blaster fire. Everyone, back to the surface. Now. But as they began to pull back, a new wave of Varkor reinforcements poured in from a hidden passage. The room was a blur of flashing lights, gunfire, and chaos. One of Ava's soldiers, Sergeant Myarias, was struck by an energy blast, her body crumpling to the ground with a soft thud. Ava's heart clenched. She couldn't afford to lose anyone else. "Move, move," Ava screamed, her pulse pounding in her ears. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. With a final push, they fought their way toward the surface. But just as Ava reached the exit, a blinding explosion shook the ground beneath them. The walls of the ancient city began to crumble, and she could hear the Varkor soldiers closing in from behind. It was only a matter of seconds before they would be surrounded. Ava didn't look back. She had one final chance. She grabbed Novak by the arm and dragged him up the last set of stairs, bursting into the fading daylight of the ruined city. The Varkor had won this round. They had lost precious time, and with Sergeant Reyes down, the team was weaker than before. But as Etta looked out over the horizon, a fierce resolve hardened in her chest. They had learned something crucial. The Varkor were not just conquerors. They were protectors, guardians of something far more powerful than mere weapons, and they would not stop until humanity had claimed it. The Varkor's ambush had been swift and merciless. The ruins of ancient Rome were no longer a place of mystery and discovery. They had become a battlefield, littered with the wreckage of both the resistance and the invaders. Sergeant Mayurai's death weighed heavily on Ava's mind. The loss of a valuable team member in such a crucial moment was a bitter reminder of the stakes they were facing. But there was no time to mourn. As the last of the resistance team fled the crumbling ruins and made their way back to their hidden base, Ava's thoughts were consumed with one thing. The Varker had anticipated them. They were dealing with an enemy far more calculating than she had first realized. Back at their makeshift command center, the survivors regrouped. The losses were significant, and morale had taken a hit. The team was battered, exhausted, and emotionally drained, but the fight was far from over. Ava had seen the way the Varker had moved in the ruins, almost like they were waiting for them. The relic, whatever it was, had to be important. And now, Ava was more determined than ever to get it before the aliens could seize it completely. "General," Novak said, breaking the silence that had settled over the room, "we've got a problem. The Varker know we were after the artifact. They'll be doubling down on every ruin, every archaeological site, and if we don't act soon, we'll be too late." Ava's mind raced. "So, what's our play? We need to get ahead of them. We can't afford to stay on the defensive. If we can find another clue, something to lead us to the next site, we might just beat them to the punch," Novak replied, his voice steady despite the weight of their losses. Ava stood up, walking to the map pinned on the wall. Her finger traced the faded lines, the locations of ancient cities and ruins that might hide the relic they were searching for. It was a long shot, but humanity was running out of options. "We go to Egypt," Ava said, her voice firm. "There's a site buried beneath the Great Pyramid. It's one of the oldest on Earth, and there are ancient texts that hint at it being a burial site for something far beyond anything we've encountered. If we're lucky, the Varker haven't gotten there yet." The team exchanged uneasy glances. Egypt, the pyramids. It felt like a leap of faith, but Ava could see the same desperation in their eyes. They didn't have much choice. "We leave at dawn," she ordered. "Get the team together. We'll move fast and light. If we're going to get to that relic before the Varker, we can't afford to waste any time." As preparations began, Ava couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle in her chest. Egypt was far from safe. The Varker were everywhere. But the alternative was worse. Waiting, sitting idly by as humanity was slowly but surely crushed under the boot of an invincible enemy. The next morning, the team set out for Egypt, traveling through covert routes, avoiding Varker patrols that now scoured the planet for human resistance. The world felt alien under their feet, a planet no longer controlled by its inhabitants. But as they neared the desert's edge, Ava's resolve only hardened. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Arriving at the site, the massive stone structures loomed like silent sentinels against the endless stretch of sand. The Great Pyramid, surrounded by nothing but the scorching desert, stood as a symbol of mankind's ancient achievements. But in this desolate landscape, it was also a reminder that all that had been built could be destroyed. The team moved swiftly into the pyramid's labyrinthine chambers, their flashlights illuminating the ancient walls that had stood for millennia. Ava's mind raced as they descended deeper into the heart of the structure. They were getting closer, but as they reached the final chamber, the ground beneath them rumbled with a deep, foreboding sound. "Get back," Ava shouted as the walls around them began to crack, dust falling from the ceiling. Something was wrong. Something was coming. And before they could react, the entrance to the chamber slammed shut. The sudden sound of the chamber's stone door slamming shut echoed through the pyramid's ancient halls, drowning out all other noise. Ava's heart skipped a beat. The air inside grew thick and heavy, each breath feeling like it might be her last. She turned toward the rest of her team, their faces lit by the dim glow of their flashlights, each one a mirror of her own unease. "What the hell?" Novak shouted, his voice muffled by the thick walls of the chamber. He was already moving toward the now sealed entrance, pounding on the stone with his fists, desperate to get out. It's locked. We're trapped. Ava's mind raced. This was no accident. The Varkar had been here, somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt. They knew what the humans were after, and they had anticipated every move. "We need to keep moving," Ava said, her voice commanding. "The relic is still here. We're not backing down now." They had no other choice. The walls of the chamber felt as though they were closing in on them, the air thickening with each passing second. But there was something in the air, something tangible, that made Ava press forward. She had seen it in the ruins of Rome, in the relic's ancient design. It was not just a weapon. It was something far older, far more dangerous. And now, it seemed, they had unwittingly activated something that had lain dormant for centuries. "Over here," Quinn called, her voice sharp as she knelt by an inscription etched into the floor. The team gathered around her, their flashlights revealing strange, arcane symbols that twisted and turned, forming patterns that were at once alien and familiar. Ava's mind spun as she scanned the symbols. This wasn't just a burial site, she realized. It was a message. The realization hit like a thunderclap. The Varkar weren't just invaders. They were guardians, protectors of something far beyond what humanity had been led to believe. This relic wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to something far older than the Varkar, far more powerful, something that, in the wrong hands, could obliterate worlds. "We need to decode this," Quinn muttered, her fingers tracing the symbols. "These are coordinates, not just any coordinates, but something precise, it looks like." But before she could finish, the entire chamber began to tremble. The floor beneath them vibrated as though some unseen force was awakening deep within the pyramid. Dust and stone rained from the ceiling, and the walls groaned in protest. "Get back," Novak shouted, pulling Quinn away from the inscriptions as the ground beneath them cracked wide open. A large stone slab lifted from the center of the room, revealing a dark, spiraling passage that descended further into the earth. The opening emitted a faint otherworldly glow, and a pulse of energy seemed to emanate from it. Ava's pulse quickened. This was it. This was what the Varkar had been guarding. "We're not alone," Quinn whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "Whatever is down there, it's ancient, and it's powerful." Ava stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're going in. Whatever's down there, we need to find it first. The Varkar are close, and if they get to it before we do, this war won't just be over. It'll be our end." With little more than a moment's hesitation, they descended into the darkness, the air growing colder as they made their way into the bowels of the pyramid. The deeper they went, the more intense the glow became. It was almost as if the very walls were alive with energy, thrumming with power that no human hand had touched in millennia. At the bottom of the descent, they reached a massive cavernous chamber. And there, at its center, was the relic. It stood on a pedestal, surrounded by a circle of ancient symbols, glowing with a faint blue light. The air around it shimmered as though reality itself was bending. Ava's breath caught in her throat. The relic was beautiful in its strange, alien design. Ancient, yet unmistakably advanced. It pulsed with an energy that seemed to hum in her bones, calling to her, whispering promises of power, of knowledge, of a future beyond imagination. But she wasn't the only one who could hear it. From the shadows of the chamber, the unmistakable sound of Varkar soldiers emerged. And this time, they were ready. The silence in the cavern was deafening. Ava stood at the edge of the chamber, her eyes locked on the relic. It pulsed with an eerie glow, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. The air around it hummed, as if alive. The power in the room was almost overwhelming, like the entire pyramid had come alive, waiting for something, or someone, to claim it. But Ava knew they couldn't claim it just yet. A faint metallic hiss broke the stillness, and the sound of Varkar soldiers emerging from the shadows sent a cold shiver down her spine. They were closer now. Ava could hear the soft thrum of their weapons powering up, the click of their exoskeletal armor shifting. They'd been waiting. They'd known this moment would come. Ava's fingers tightened around her blaster. She could see Novak, Quinn, and the rest of the team taking their positions, weapons at the ready, eyes scanning the chamber. The Varkar had arrived in force. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one thing the Varkar didn't: the element of unpredictability. "They're not going to just give it to us," Novak whispered, his eyes narrow, a bead of sweat running down his temple. Ava's mind raced. They couldn't fight this battle on their own terms, not in this chamber, not with the relic standing in the center of it all. The Varkar had been waiting for them here for a reason. They'd prepared for every possible scenario, but what they hadn't anticipated was the desperation in humanity's eyes, the refusal to accept defeat. "We don't need to fight them," Ava said, her voice steady as she glanced at Quinn. "We need to control the relic." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Ava pointed at the symbols on the floor surrounding the relic, glowing with energy. "These symbols, they're not just decorations. They're a mechanism, a lock. If we can activate them, we can control the relic's power. And if we can do that, we might stand a chance against the Varkar." Before Quinn could respond, a Varkar soldier stepped forward, its armored form illuminated by the eerie glow. Its voice echoed in the chamber, distorted and mechanical. "You are foolish, humans. The relic belongs to us. We are its guardians. Surrender now." The words felt like an ultimatum, but Ava's resolve remained unbroken. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming Earth. They couldn't back down. Ava exchanged a brief glance with Novak. They had no choice. "Hold them off," Ava ordered. "Quinn, get to the pedestal. I'll cover you." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted toward the Varkar soldiers, ducking behind a stone column as they opened fire. The sound of energy blasts filled the air, a constant hum as the Varkar unleashed their deadly weapons. Ava's team scattered, taking cover wherever they could, firing back with all the firepower they had. But it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. Meanwhile, Quinn was already moving toward the pedestal, her hands trembling as she examined the symbols etched into the floor. The Varkar had underestimated her. She was an archaeologist, a student of history, of the past, and she understood these ancient languages better than anyone. The Varkar's attention was focused on Ava and the others, giving Quinn precious seconds. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the symbols. The moment she touched them, the floor beneath her began to vibrate. The symbols flared with a blinding light, and the relic at the center of the room seemed to react, its power intensifying. The Varkar soldiers froze, their weapons lowering. Ava took the opportunity to fire, taking out one of the soldiers before ducking back into cover. "Quinn, what are you doing?" Novak shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "I'm activating it." Quinn responded, her voice strained but determined. "We need to use the relic's power before they get to us." With one final push, Quinn pressed her hand onto the last symbol. The relic responded, sending a shockwave of energy rippling through the chamber. The ground trembled violently as the air around them distorted, the very fabric of reality warping. The Varkar soldiers recoiled, stunned by the sheer magnitude of the power unleashed. Ava could feel it, the surge of energy, the sense that the world had shifted, that they had tapped into something far beyond their understanding. The Varkar were no longer in control. The relic had chosen them. "This is it," Ava said, her voice fierce with conviction. "Humanity will win this war." But the Varkar weren't finished yet. As the chamber began to crack and break apart under the pressure of the relic's energy, the leader of the Varkar soldiers stepped forward. His form loomed large and imposing, his helmet reflecting the pulsing light of the relic. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," he hissed, his voice cold and venomous. "You think you can control this power? You're just as doomed as the civilizations before you." Ava met his gaze, her hand tight around her blaster. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for everything." The Varkar leader's words echoed through the chamber, but Ava's resolve didn't waver. The relic pulsed with a deafening energy, its power coursing through the air like a storm, shaking the very ground beneath them. The pyramid walls groaned under the strain, cracks spiderwebbing across the stone. "You may think you control this power," the Varkar leader sneered, stepping forward, his armored form towering over the humans. "But no one can wield the ancient forces you've disturbed. You are only accelerating your own destruction." Ava's eyes narrowed. She could feel the tension in the air, the heavy weight of the Varkar's threat. But something had changed. The relic's power was hers now. The Varkar didn't understand it. They never had. This was humanity's moment. "Let's see who's controlling what," Ava said, her voice cold with determination. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on the Varkar leader. With a swift motion, Quinn activated the final sequence of symbols. The relic flared with a blinding light, releasing an immense pulse of energy that shot out in all directions. The force of it was overwhelming, pushing back both the Varkar and the resistance team. The chamber rumbled as if the earth itself were shaking in protest. The relic had awakened fully. For a moment, everything went silent. Then a booming, otherworldly voice filled the chamber, reverberating through the walls. It was not a human voice, nor was it Varkar. It was as if the pyramid itself were speaking, ancient and omnipotent. "The power is not to be controlled," the voice intoned. "It is to be understood." The Varkar leader froze, his eyes widening beneath his helmet. For the first time, Ava saw fear flicker across his cold exterior. This was no ordinary relic. It was a sentient force, older than the Varkar, older than anything the universe had known. "You've been guarding this for millennia," Ava said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Not to protect it from us, but to protect itself from you." The Varkar leader took a step back, his shoulders slumping as the realization hit. They had misunderstood the relic's purpose. It wasn't a weapon to be wielded. It was a force of balance, something that could not be controlled by any race or empire. The Varkar had been its keepers, yes, but they had never truly understood it. Not like humanity. As Ava stood there, she realized the truth. The relic's power didn't belong to the Varkar, nor to humanity. It was a force of equilibrium, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. And that moment was now. A sudden burst of energy enveloped the Varkar leader, sending him crashing to the ground, his body writhing in pain. His soldiers faltered, confused and disoriented by the immense power now swirling around them. Ava didn't hesitate. She raised her blaster and fired. One shot. Another. The remaining Varkar soldiers fell, their armor cracking and splintering under the force of the relic's energy. With the Varkar defeated, the room began to settle. The ground stopped shaking, and the relic dimmed. Its power no longer a violent surge, but a calm, steady pulse. The battle was over. "We did it," Quinn whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief as she took in the scene. "We actually did it." Ava turned to her team, her face a mix of exhaustion and fierce triumph. "We're not just survivors. We're the ones who changed the course of history." The reality of their victory sank in. Humanity had stood at the brink of annihilation, but now they had something the Varkar never had: hope. The relic wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol that humanity would not be broken, no matter how insurmountable the odds. As they made their way back to the surface, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the horizon, Ava knew this was only the beginning. The Varkar were gone, for now, but the relic would always remain, and it was theirs to protect, to understand, and to ensure that Earth's future was one humanity could shape. Ava looked toward the horizon, the war not fully over, but the world now holding its breath for what came next.